Advisory Council is now in its 22nd year and brings together diverse community leaders under the umbrella of B'nai B'rith in an unbroken friendship as friends of the family we choose for ourselves. For those of you who are new to our fireside chats, let me tell you about some of our impressive guests who have given us updates and insight into issues that impact our lives. Our guests have included former premiers of the provinces across the country, former prime ministers. We've had award-winning journalists, bank presidents, CEOs, leaders in policing, corporate executives, opposition party leaders at federal and provincial levels. We've had cabinet ministers, hospital CEOs, and many leading human rights activists who have been battling global human rights violations around the world. Tonight's topic is a special briefing on the Iranian threat, insight into global and Canadian security challenges. The format this evening is going to be a fireside chat with our guests, Paul Goldenberg and Alex Goldenberg. It'll be hosted by Rich Robertson, the Director of Research and Advocacy for B'nai B'rith Canada. All guests will be muted tonight. Our format will be approximately 40 minutes of live communication with our guests, followed by approximately 15 minutes of a Q&A. If any of you have any questions that you would like answered by Paul or Alex, please use the chat feature online, and Rich will be reviewing those and determining the questions that are best suited for our guests this evening to answer. So let me take a moment to introduce our special guests. Paul Goldenberg, former senior member, United States Department of Homeland Security Advisory Council, senior fellow and chief advisor, Policy and International Policing, Rutgers University Miller Center on Policing and Community Resilience, distinguished visitor fellow for transnational security at the University of Ottawa, and president and board member, Global Consortium of Law Enforcement Training Executives. You are about to join one of North America's leading experts on transnational security for a timely and urgent conversation about the Iranian threat, its global reach, and its growing impact here at home. Drawing on decades of frontline experience in counterterrorism and hate crime prevention, Paul Goldenberg brings unparalleled insight into the dangers posed by extremist regimes and what governments and communities and civil society must do to stay vigilant and protected. From advising U.S. Homeland Security and the RCMP to spearheading missions across Europe, to testifying before U.S. Congress, British Parliament, and the European Union, Mr. Goldenberg has helped shape the global response to ideological extremism, cybersecurity threats, and targeted violence, particularly against faith-based and minority communities. Alex Goldenberg serves as the Director of Intelligence at Iranian. He holds a master's degree from New York University and is a fellow at Rutgers University, as well as an affiliate of NYU Institute for the Study of Emerging Threats. His research has been featured on NBC News, The Atlantic, Forbes, Vice News, Wall Street Journal, and New York Times, and other prominent media outlets. He has advised lawmakers, practitioners, and mainstream media on critical issues and has testified before Congress on foreign influence operations. Ladies and gentlemen, if we can now turn it over to Rich Robertson, who will now host the evening's Q&A period with both Alex and Paul.
Thank you so much, Aubrey, for those introductions. Before we get started with our discussion proper, I just want to do a bit of housekeeping. Please do not send any audience questions to myself. In the chat, you will notice there is a an individual who has marked themselves as B'nai B'rith Questions. Please send those questions directly to B'nai B'rith Questions using the chat feature, and my colleague will then forward them to me. Paul, Alex, thank you so much for joining us tonight as we are here to discuss the Iranian threat and insights into global and Canadian security challenges. I'd like to start by positing us with where we are presently. Following Operation Rising Lion, what is the future of the Iranian regime? What's the result of the latest conflict on the Iranian regime? And let's keep it loose. And if both of you just want to chime in, and I'll steer the discussion accordingly.
Alex, you want to take that first?
Yeah, absolutely. Richard, first and foremost, thanks for moderating, and Aubrey, thank you for the kind introductions. Honored to be here. I think it's important to preface this question regarding the current ceasefire between Iran, Israel, and the United States. It's extremely fragile. Despite taking overwhelming damage during the 12-day conflict, culminating in U.S. strikes on several Iranian nuclear facilities, it appears that Iran is doubling down on its defiance rather than showing that they're willing to come to the negotiating table. The regime continues to assert its right to enrich uranium, refuses inspections, and appears to be more committed to not escalation, but brinksmanship over de-escalation. Just over the past couple of days, we've been monitoring at Narrowvance. Iran's propaganda arms are circulating apocalyptic imagery, simulating nuclear strikes on Israel. There are, as many of us know on this call, still active bounties on President Donald Trump, Mike Pompeo, John Bolton, and they're signaling that these bounties are still active. I think a high-profile Ayatollah just last week issued a new fatwa against the President of the United States. And while further escalation, in my opinion, in the near future might not be probable, it's still a possibility and still very volatile, and things can change overnight. But we are seeing that the IRGC or the Iranian regime doesn't want to escalate. There have been a couple of stories over the past few days of IRGC, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, high-level officials have been killed in what the Iranians have described as gas leaks over the past couple of days. Now, I will not assert what those particular explosions were, but it does seem like the Iranians are apprehensive from escalating, even in the face of what appear to be low-level targeted attacks. But that said, Iran is significantly weakened, and this 2-year period of heightened tension that we experienced has created quite a bit of unexpected opportunities. Gaza hopefully will be quieting down soon. There's a rare and unique, unexpected moment. It would have been outside the realm of possibility just years ago that we would be considering normalization, not just with Saudi Arabia, and by we I mean the United States facilitating something that looks like the Abraham Accords. Syria is expressing a willingness to normalize with Israel. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, these developments would be, unthinkable. Hezbollah appears to be under an immense amount of domestic pressure in Lebanon because the Lebanese people are still very upset that Hezbollah dragged the country into war and towards economic collapse. So even though Iran is severely weakened, increasingly isolated, they're still a player, but there are still very, very much silver linings around the corner as it relates to, the recent conflict. However, with this normalization that we may see in the next few months to few years, it comes with a risk. Many believe, and senior Hamas leadership has stated, that they launched their operation on October 7th to disrupt normalization efforts in the region. And I think that risk is still quite high. And a quartered Iranian regime oftentimes turns outward. They leverage their proxy networks, although their proxy networks have been severely degraded, but they still have intact criminal networks, true believers, and infrastructure for some pretty sophisticated influence operations, which I would be happy to get more into later in this conversation.
Thank you, Alex. Paul, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, so I think you heard Alex mention the term silver lining a few times, which I concur. The caveat is that Iran still maintains one of the most sophisticated and well-funded state-sponsored terrorism apparatus globally, by far. Through its Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the Quds Force, they have heavily supported and have had some success, although they have had definitely a very rough time the last 6 months. But they still have their claws into Hezbollah, which we all know is a London-based operation with many sympathizers across North America. They have Qatar, Hezbollah, and other Iraqi Shia militias operating across other parts of the Mideast, but also extend out into Europe. The Houthis, which we're hearing about day in and day out in Yemen, increasingly active. They are not to be underestimated. They are active in cyber and now becoming very much active in influence operations, seeking to reach young people abroad in North America. We still have the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which we all know has the ties to Hamas. And these groups absolutely serve both ideological and strategic functions for Tehran, targeting their perceived enemies, which is, quite frankly, the US, Israel, Sunni rivals, many across Canada. Look, the intelligence community, your own intelligence community is well aware that they were plotting and planning strategic assassinations in your own country, and continue to build clandestine operations, even in spite of, sometimes not because of.
And you both mentioned the proxy networks and the clandestine operations. I think, Alex, you touched on the criminal infrastructure, understanding that it might not be the regime proper's desire to escalate right now. What type of a threat do the proxy networks, the criminal and state-sponsored terror infrastructure that Iran has at its disposal, what type of a threat do they presently still pose?
I think at this juncture, it's a low-level threat, but it very much exists, especially related to the Jewish community in Canada. It seems traditionally, if you've taken a look at some of the thwarted assassination attempts, for example, just a couple of years ago, an Iranian hired two Canadian Hells Angels to assassinate dissidents in Maryland, Iranian dissidents. So it seems for the most part, and this could change, Iranian, especially violent operations in the diaspora have targeted Iranian dissidents and political individuals in recent years. However, things can change. While many of these operations do focus on dissidents, that same infrastructure can easily pivot to Jewish institutions, leaders, outspoken critics of the regime. And again, this is a possibility, not a probability, but definitely something that we need to be keeping an eye on. But along with these kinetic threats, Iran has a robust disinformation ecosystem. They push in a very strategic way anti-Semitic, anti-Western, anti-Israel narratives in multiple languages, targeting different communities across the world. They have most of this is through the Islamic Republic of Iran Broadcasting, known as IRIB. They have a multi-billion-dollar budget, $1 billion, just dedicated to amplifying foreign influence operations. And they're often quite creative. These operations exploit local grievances, polarize local diaspora communities, and oftentimes, as a result of obviously increased anti-Semitism through these foreign influence operations, Jews become, direct targets of this ideological warfare. It was just reported on, and we were monitoring this at Narrowvance, a bot network that, amplified pro-regime content. As soon as Iran cut off internet access, it seemed like this network that we were tracking, and many did not make a direct attribution until this moment in time. Soon as Iran's internet blacked out, it seemed like tens of thousands of bots, a few organizations had their eyes on, just went completely quiet. Very robust. I'm sure they're going to outsource that as a best practice for the next round of conflict. But yeah, definitely we need to pay close attention, not just on kinetic activities, but ideologically driven influence operations.
Yeah, when we talk about kinetic activities, though, we also have to understand, and this is not a political statement. I am not going, with my Canadian brothers and sisters, we're not going political here by any means, but we had porous borders. We've had open borders for 4 years. I just returned from the border literally 48 hours ago. I'm an advisor down there, working very closely with the National Sheriff's Association on information sharing. And it's although the borders are relatively somewhat quiet right now, those that are crossing are still pretty dangerous people versus the families and others that we had. So we don't know what came across those borders, but we do know that thousands and thousands of Iranians and others have crossed those borders. We also know that we hear the term sleeper cell out there time and time again. The concern, is, do we have these Iranian sleeper cells sitting out there? And we also know, when I say know, or we understand or believe, that Hezbollah's Unit 910, which is an external operational branch, is still very much active. 910 is known to maintain cells throughout North America, in Michigan, New York, and from what we understand, we don't have all the facts, Toronto, over the last decade. And we do understand that there have been surveillances of U.S. and Canadian infrastructure, U.S. and Canadian personnel, and unfortunately with a focus on Jewish and Israeli sites. So, you combine that with the open borders. The issue is, which is very difficult for our brothers and sisters in law enforcement, is that a lot of these groups have had their deep cover. They're trained in surveillance, they're trained in explosives, they're trained in communications, and they're trained to keep quiet. You're not going to see them on the internet. These are the ones that aren't on the internet. We wish they were. It would make life a lot easier for your intelligence services and your policing services. So it makes it much more difficult for those that are deep rooted in our societies, who may be, in fact, plotting and planning. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later, because we have a program here in the States that, quite frankly, I used to roll my eyes at and joke about. It's called See Something, Say Something. And when I first heard it, I just shook my head and I said, that won't work. And again, when I get more towards the closing, I have become the biggest fan and the biggest proponent of that program. So we can talk about that later. So back to you, Richard.
So Alex, you touched on disinformation, misinformation, and Paul, you when talking about the open borders were sort of, I think we could chalk up, diaspora communities, members of that coming into our country. So I'm wondering if you could both comment on how foreign adversaries, whether they be the Iranian regime or others, are weaponizing diaspora communities in Canada, the United States, to spread disinformation, incite anti-Semitism, amplify division. Really, how are diaspora communities being utilized, to undermine our democratic values?
So
Well,
Richard, oh, sorry, after you.
I want to be clear though, when we say
Mhm.
I spent a lot of time in that area. I actually chaired the United States Department of Homeland Security's Foreign Fighter Task Force,
Mhm.
which was up and running for almost 3 years. We
Mhm.
studied I mean, it was an intensive study of why and how are we losing young people
Mhm.
to ISIS.
Mhm.
We were naive, basically. I mean, what sometimes as parents and grandparents were naive as to what our youth, what our young people are listening to, and who they're listening to, and the fact that maybe we aren't listening close enough. So when we talk about diaspora communities, are we talking about diaspora communities that may have originated from, or immigrated from, or the children of? Is that, Richard? I want to answer that question correctly. So is that what you're thinking about when you ask that question?
Yeah, I think there's a concern that, specifically when it comes to the Iranian regime, that members of the Iranian diaspora, whether they're first generation, second generation, or so on, might be utilized to spread disinformation or to amplify views that might erode our democratic values. There's also, I think, a concern that immigrants from other territories that perhaps don't align with our values here in Canada might be weaponized to spread discontent.
So
Yeah,
let me, if it's called flash to bang. It used to take years to radicalize someone,
Mhm.
or months to radicalize someone. With AI and with how the internet is used today, look, ISIS and the Iranians and Hezbollah and Hamas, they used the savviest, most innovative methods for reaching young people. They spoke their language. Even the cartels are doing that today. So, and that's something that I know that Alex can talk to much more than I can, because that's what they really concentrate on. But remember what I said, flash to bang, it could happen in days. In days, these young people can be indoctrinated and radicalized, versus months or years. That's why a tremendous amount of this work, it's not just, it's a law enforcement response, but it's also a community response. Alex, I'll turn it over to you.
no, I completely agree. ISIS had a unit that they very much invested quite a bit of resources into, that they referred to as the industrious ones.
Yeah, the industrious ones.
And they were not on the battlefield, they were on their laptops, publishing fine-tuned propaganda and memes across social media platforms, mainly Twitter. And it was extraordinarily effective at engaging with youth, many of whom they targeted ended up coming to fight with ISIL. And, Iranians and their proxies are still engaging in that type of activity, identifying both individuals and groups that are disaffected, that are disturbed by, what they're seeing on their social media feeds, and maybe motivated to take matters into their own hands, which we have seen in the United States over the past couple of months, where two Israeli embassy employees were shot dead in DC outside of a Jewish communal event. And another individual who was yelling "Free Palestine" threw a Molotov cocktail at a group of peaceful protesters. Not saying that that is motivated by our foreign adversaries, but they definitely co-opt those grievances that accelerate individuals to go, as the other Mr. Goldenberg said, from flash to bang. But now that you mentioning diaspora, I also, not to be, I mean, I think everyone probably recognizes this challenge. The Jewish diaspora. I mean, large segments of North American Jewish communities, especially our kids, teenagers, 20 somethings, they're gravitating towards Jewish Voice for Peace, which frames Israel, and by extension, the West, as colonialist, imperialist, capitalist, and therefore has no right to exist. You see tens of thousands of Jewish New Yorkers gravitating towards Zoran Mamdani, who himself has normalized and founded groups that normalize rhetoric that directly endanger the Jewish people. So not only do we have to worry about diaspora from, foreign countries, but we have to worry about, um, our own youth as well that seem to be seduced by movements that are diametrically opposed to their own safety and security. And I'll give you an example. A story came out yesterday or over the weekend that Zoran Mamdani's campaign has a group called Jews for Zoran that was not founded by a Jewish activist, but founded by the niece of a guy named Roy Neville Singham, which, according to my organization, the GW Center on Extremism, and even the New York Times, is linked to a Chinese foreign influence operation. So a lot of what you're seeing is not organic, but some of our Gen Zers on TikTok are getting seduced by, many of these movements that want to fundamentally reshape Western discourse and essentially, put us in danger.
There's also an exploitation of the US and Canada precious civil liberties to shield these hostile activities under the guise of activism or religious freedom. And we're seeing more and more of that. And it's just a fine line. It's really a fine line. And for law enforcement, it becomes even a finer line, particularly on how and when intelligence can be gathered. So it's definitely a challenge. What you're hearing, I think, from Alex and I is which you probably, most of you on this call knew. This is very complex. This is multifaceted. It's complex and multifaceted. This isn't just, let's radicalize some people to go and blow up a synagogue, God forbid, or attack a Canadian RCMP or Metro Toronto police station. It's much more complex than that, and that's what makes it that much more dangerous. And there's billions of dollars behind this, and the foreign adversaries are working this feverishly. The word China in there is, how does China get involved in this, right? You heard Alex mention it. They're going to be releasing a report shortly that addresses those issues. The end of the day, and I'll just stop there on my end. The end of the day, though, is it leads potentially to just unprecedented violence. What just occurred in Boulder, Colorado, there were people burned alive in Boulder, Colorado, burned alive, and that is the end result. Sorry, Richard. Next question.
I want to just go back to something that Alex said, because I think it's a very interesting point to sort of terse out a little bit further, and that's the impact of foreign interference or, foreign manipulation on the Jewish diaspora and perhaps some of the more impressionable cohorts within the Jewish diaspora. Alex, are you able to maybe touch on that a little bit further?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's probably prudent to rewind just a little bit, because I think a lot of this is happening on college campuses. And it's in part due, not totally due, to foreign funding, but that plays a role. The Network Contagion Research Institute, of which I'm a senior advisor to, published a report in late 2023 that showed over $13 billion, billion with a B, in undisclosed foreign contributions to US-based universities. We should do a similar analysis in Canadian universities, mainly from what I would describe as authoritarian regimes, Qatar, China, and others. Qatar was one of the main funders behind China. And we found, out of the 200 universities that we looked at, the more money these universities accepted from these foreign authoritarian regimes. By the way, we don't really know what the money is for. It's completely undisclosed. There are some details. Texas A&M, for example, is sharing nuclear secrets with the state of Qatar. There are many initiatives across the United States that send American journalism majors to take part in workshops and get special credentials with Al Jazeera, which is one of the leading anti-Semitic propaganda outlets that exist. And we found that universities that accept these funds have a 300% increase in anti-Semitic incidents, and 85% of them were more likely, those that are accepted this money, to target scholars for censorship or disciplinary action. So it actually is like seeding authoritarianism on these campuses. And after we wrote this report, uh, over the past 4 years, there have been in excess, I think, of close to 50 billion from these foreign adversaries into the US school system. So they're clearly seeing it as a battleground for ideological warfare, in my opinion. And we need to see it as such as well. We also have to look at the curriculum. We released a study in November of 2024, co-authored by Rutgers University, that found, and this is a peer-reviewed, now it is a peer-reviewed research paper that shows how anti-oppressive DEI materials, exposure to DEI materials actually increase bias and hostility. And participants that engaged with anti-oppressive DEI materials oftentimes developed what we call a hostile attribution bias, which perceives discrimination where none exist. So I think there's also this ideology that's been seeded both inorganically and organically on college campuses that's kind of creating an atmosphere where people are viewing the world through colonialist, oppressor and anti-oppressor, or oppressor and oppressed frameworks that oftentimes frame Israel and Jewish students as privileged and therefore, guilty of all of these, horrific things in the world.
And I think that that's a fascinating way to look at it, Alex, and we're deeply concerned at B'nai B'rith Canada with the rise of extremism on our college campuses. So thank you very much for that insight. Before I go on to my next series of questions, Paul, I just want to come back to something that you mentioned very briefly. You talked about sleeper cells, and sleeper cells, I feel like in our Western culture almost take on this like mythical sense. Is there any way that you could maybe discuss a little bit more about sleeper cells and what they really are and what we need to be on the lookout for? Are there any telltale signs of these?
The challenge for law enforcement, and I know we have law enforcement on the line, is they are as I stated before, they're operatives with very deep cover identities. They live their lives in a very purposeful manner. They keep low key. They stay out of trouble. Probably some here legally, and it makes it very, 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 very tough. Sleeper cells are doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. Here's the challenge, though, from a policing standpoint. We in policing, and I can speak for North America, we are we trained up for that what we call the lone wolf. We've trained up for that unfortunate young 18, 19-year-old that picks up an AR and 9 times out of 10 doesn't know how to use it and still can kill 30 people or 20 people or 15 people. So even the training to be able to address when and if these types of cells strike. What we have done here in the States, and I know you've been doing some of this work up in Canada, is we have been preparing the citizenry. There is a tremendous amount of work done here in the United States, training people in synagogues, in churches, in mosques. We have operationalized the see something, say something. So even the best of the best, I don't want to give the sleeper cells too much credit. They still are going to do surveillance. They still have to surveil. They still have to look for their targets. There are still actions as human actions or as human beings and certain behaviors. And I'm not getting into profiling or racial profiling. If we invest in training our citizenry and empowering our citizenry, it will absolutely unequivocally pay dividends, not only for the law enforcement communities, but for the safety and the security of the communities themselves. And it was a long haul here in these United States to do that type of work and to convince communities that that's what they needed to do. I will tell you, it has been extremely successful here. I can give you case after case after case where the training has absolutely paid off. And it's not just making it safer for the community members themselves, but the law enforcement community gains tremendous insight and intelligence into who's surveilling, where, when, and how. We're not talking, and I want to be clear, we're not talking about creating vigilantes. We're not talking about creating a security force. We're talking about the word empowerment, empowering communities to be able to, with enough so they can protect themselves, not in the context of taking on a sleeper cell that's coming after a synagogue or a Jewish community center or a federation or a building, but at least has enough knowledge to know when to pick up that phone, when to call 911, what information to provide, how quickly to provide it, and really be a first line of defense. The second, if we're talking about countering sleeper cells, because they're so difficult, they are sophisticated. And our training, even within the context of our police, has to be even that much more sophisticated. We don't train all the time to take on 7 or 8 Kandahar or folks trained in some encampment in the Middle East with grenades and sophisticated weaponry and rocket launchers. We don't train for that here. We can't train for everything. And on the other hand, also, I'm going to say something. In the United States, the past 5 years, since Floyd, unfortunately, our policing communities here have been beaten up so much. We have lost substantial numbers of police, and we're dealing with young police officers that don't have that level of expertise. And in addition to that, many of the police departments, their weapons, their heavy weapons, have been removed and taken away from them. So we're in a difficult spot right now. We really are. Look, I will say, as someone that has worked in Canada with the Canadian policing for 35 years, you have one of the most sophisticated professional policing services, bar none in the world. Actually, when the rest of the world needs training, they come to RCMP, they come to Toronto, I can mention other departments. That's the level of expertise that you have. But we have, it's pivoting, and we can only pivot so much. So I'm sorry if I expounded a little too much on the sleeper cells. The sleeper cells are something that should keep us up at night. We cannot forget Mumbai. Mumbai was a very dangerous situation because we had well-trained people in multiple numbers that killed a lot of people in a very short period of time, and we need to train for that. But it's not just training the police, that the police are going to have to do this in conjunction with the citizenry. Otherwise, it won't work.
No, Paul, I thank you for going into such detail. And I can tell you that a takeaway from this discussion for me personally will be the need to empower civilians through I love it, the operationalization of see something, say something. I think that that's a fantastic takeaway for all of us here. You both have very different roles, but are very learned when it comes to the field of counter extremism and foreign influence. And I will start with Alex, and then we'll go to Paul. How is Canada currently perceived internationally when it comes to countering extremism and foreign influence?
I think there is room for improvement, to be as diplomatic as possible. From my understanding, like there are some, and I correct me if I'm wrong. The United States, we have a Foreign Agents Registration Act, where if an individual is working at the behest of not just a foreign adversary, any government, it's not the United States, they have to report that activity, and it's open to the public, which is a imperfect but decent mechanism that allows at least the American people to better understand foreign influence in some of their operations in the United States. I don't think Canada has something akin to that.
That is correct. It's been considered by Parliament. There's even been some draft legislation, but nothing has been enacted.
To me, that sounds like a no-brainer. So that would be a positive first step. And I would also I mean, because Canada it's expansive, it's diverse. It really would be crucial to better understand any individuals working at the behest of the foreign government. And it's not to say that they're not allowed to do that. It just needs to be disclosed. I would also, I think it's also imperative to better understand, and this is an issue that we're contending with in the United States, foreign influence on your university systems. It's been the more you peel back the onion in the United States, the more problems you find. And I don't know if that's something that anyone is contending with in Canada, but should. But yeah, other than that, the other Mr. Goldenberg, do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I do. Knowing what I know about the Canadian policing services, they need all the support that they could get. They need the funding. They need the support. They need the equipment. They need the training. They need the support of their people. You know, they're the first responders. They're literally the first responders. Everything always starts and ends with the police. If things go bad, it's the police. If things go good, it's the politicians. So, and with no disrespect to the politicians. So, you know, this isn't a corny statement that I'm going to make. And as someone that has traveled throughout Eastern Europe and dealing with police agencies all over the world, I have come to really realize how important civilian police agencies are to keeping the threads of democracy together. We keep throwing the words out, threat to democracy, threat to democracy. Without our police, you want to talk about a threat to democracy. So, you know, they are doing everything that they humanly can up there. They just need the support. They need the support. And what does that mean? You know, there are laws. You know, it's when I first headed up a hate crime division in the state of New Jersey, I was primarily responsible for organized crime, and I received this responsibility from the governor, and he says, "Well, now you've got to take on these hate crimes." I go, "Well, I don't even know what to do with the hate crimes." And I would send my agents out, my detectives out, and they would come back so frustrated and say, "I just spent 2 weeks on a cemetery desecration or a graffiti on a synagogue, which is horrendous. It's horrific. And what am I supposed to do with it? If I make an arrest, these are misdemeanor crimes. They're not even considered felony or you know." So without the legislation behind you, without the laws to support you, that's even makes it more difficult to do your job out there. So you know, we need a deep dive into what do we have to work with that will help support the police to do their part. But if they don't have the laws supporting them to do their part, you're going to be in a difficult place.
Well said, Paul. And I'm conscious of our time, and I want to get to some questions from the audience. So I'm going to ask a forward-looking question of the two of you, and then we'll take some questions from the audience because we've had some very good questions come in. Let's look 5 years ahead. What global developments could most significantly affect Jewish populations in North America, and how can we proactively prepare for them? Alex, will go to you first, and then to Paul.
I think anti-Semitism is becoming more acceptable on the fringes on both sides of the political spectrum. I'm seeing, for example, Tucker Carlson retweeting, or engaging with individuals on the far left that share kind of, his sentiments towards Israel. So I think there's a rising intolerance, anti-Western and anti-Semitic sentiment that we need to contend with. A lot of that is fanned by foreign actors, but a lot of it is organic as well. And I think there is a high possibility that these actors on the extremes of each political spectrum will start to collaborate with each other, gain more followers, seduce more people into kind of their ideology that the West is fundamentally bad. And I think, we need to make sure that those viewpoints continue to be not palatable to the masses. And that's going to be a real challenge because we live in an age of information disorder where the most extreme views garner the most engagement. People kind of follow the wisdom of the crowd, and even if that engagement is inorganic, they believe, oh, people ought to feel this way, they must have a point. And I think we need to definitely contend with the hyperpolarization that's being fueled by not only social media, but many of our lawmakers and influencers as well.
Thank you, Alex. Paul, what do you see as the biggest concern in the next 5 years?
That's a tough question. Before I answer, I'm going to give a shout out to one of my oldest and dearest Canadian friends who I haven't spoken to, Norm Gardner. Norm, if you're on there, you are my hero. I worked with Norm 25 years ago on these very issues before it was, to even do these kind of hate crimes, and Norm was way ahead of the curve on that. So I'm going to say something probably a little more bolder. I think we have to be careful. I do. The word anti-Semitism is being continuously thrown out there, not only by Jews, but by non-Jews, by adversaries, by anti-Semites. In 5 years, I have to believe we're going to be okay. There's no other choice. Jews are not some foreign entity within their own nations. Canadian Jews are Canadian people. American Jews are Americans. Belgian Jews are Belgian. I can go on and on and on. And I think there has to, the word anti-Semitism is just being thrown out there so much. We've got to be careful. We have to be careful. It's there. There's no doubt. And it's explosive. It's dangerous. And the Jewish people are being murdered and killed because of their religion or their association with the state of Israel. But I believe that what we cannot do is stop going to synagogue, stop going to our Jewish centers, stop wearing your Stars of David, stop wearing your kippahs. We cannot stop doing what we're doing, because if we do, then why wake up tomorrow morning? That's it. That's it. You can't. You got, in 5 years, the Jewish people are going to be here. They're going to be as much today a part of their societies as they were yesterday. There's in the United States and Canada, there's Jewish firemen and Jewish police chiefs and Jewish police officers and Jewish garbage collect. I can go on and on and on. And we're a part of that society. And in 5 years, we're going to be there. It's a very rough patch right now. It has to be taken on straightforward. We have to go after people that want to harm or kill because of who we are. And we've got to probably get even more aggressive over the next couple of years on these issues. But we're going to be here in 5 years. And we cannot stop doing what we're doing. We've got to train. We've got to be more vigilant. We've got to be more cautious. We've got to work closer with our police. We need to support our police. But you can't run. That's all. That's what I'm going to say. You can't run. So, and we've got to be careful not to continuously be seen as a victim. The Jewish people aren't victims. So that's my last word on that.
Thank you for that, Paul. Thank you for your pride and your confidence. It's palpable through the screen, and I really appreciate it. Going to take a couple questions from the audience now. Alex, is one of your silver linings in regards to the recent conflict? You mentioned normalization. Could you maybe talk, one of the questions from the audience is, could you talk a little bit further about how a weakened Iran makes normalization, for instance, with the Saudis more attainable?
That's a great question. Look, while many in the region were um, talking about many states in the region were condemning Israel's actions against Iran and United States' bombardment of their nuclear facilities. When their laptops were closed and their phones were off, there were likely um, very positive words exchanged in the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and elsewhere, because the Iranians have not just been a threat, an existential threat to the Israelis, but the entire Middle East. Through the Houthis constantly creating a headache and waging violence against the Saudis, to I can go on and on. So I do think that there is a unique opportunity for normalization to happen following a ceasefire or a calm in Gaza. People want Iran out. They would probably prefer a different regime, but they'll take a weakened one. And I think the Middle East is recalibrated in a way that creates at least the opportunity for stability and peace for years to come.
Thank you, Alex. And the next question from the audience I'm going to pose to you, Paul. I think it has to do with a lot of your mindset around the operationalization of see something, say something. But what can the everyday Canadian do to protect themselves and to assist law enforcement?
I think it's extremely important that there are training programs, not to turn them into commandos by any means, but these training programs are really good. There's 2 hour, 3 hour online vigilance, suspicious activity reporting. I cannot tell you how many lives were saved by a darn phone call, one phone call. And unless you're trained to understand or know what to look for. So to me, working with your policing services, I don't know what courses are up there, what are not up there. If anyone reaches out to me, I'll be more than happy to share what we know. I was very intimately involved in these trainings over the years. Some of you know that I was the co-founder of the Secure Community Network a long time ago, and our main theme was training and empowering members of the community. And I'm not talking about firearms. I want to be clear on that, because I know I'm going to get a lot of, I get a lot of calls on guns and this and that. You're a lot more dangerous when you know who's watching you, what type of individual may be watching you, and what to do when they are watching you, which means pick up that phone and call your local police. So there needs to be more partnerships. Information sharing needs to be more robust, I think. There's a lot of room for improvement there. So it's really building capacity between the Jewish community and the police, which you have absolutely extraordinary relationships up there. I'm well aware of them. You've had them well before some of us down here in the United States. But it's operationalizing the see something, say something versus just a term on a building, and really having people in synagogues that are trained, that know what to do, and know how to respond and save lives.
Thank you, Paul. And I think we have time for one more question from the audience. But before we get there, I just want to echo something that Paul said, which as a Jewish community here in Canada, we are truly blessed to have the relationship with law enforcement that we do, and to have the finest members of law enforcement working alongside us from coast to coast. So for all the law enforcement, I know there's some members on this call. Thank you for everything that you do for our communities. Alex, I'm going to go to you for the last question, and Paul, feel free to chime in if you would like to. A question from the audience, Alex, is what's your opinion of Qatar as a regional actor, and how do you believe their relationship with the United States will play out?
Oh,
A good one to end on.
That is a great one to end on.
that's an amazing question.
I think Qatar is they frame themselves as a mediator, but they are a bad actor. They have funded to the tune of tens of billions of dollars U.S. universities that appear to be fomenting anti-Semitism. They they run Al Jazeera, which is the largest, most prolific amplifier of anti-Semitic, anti-Western drivel that's out there. They host the Muslim Brotherhood and fund the Muslim Brotherhood, which is an Islamist political organization that, again, does not believe Israel has the right to exist. They frequently host Yusuf al-Qaradawi, who passed away a couple of years ago. But he had a show on Al Jazeera where he would rationalize suicide bombings against Israeli civilians. So while they put on a diplomatic face to much of the world, on one hand, the other hand is incredibly pernicious and has created a lot of challenges for the state of Israel and the Jewish people worldwide. And I think unless something changes, i.e., our posture towards the state of Qatar, they're going to continue doing what they've been doing over the past 2 decades or so.
Thank you, Alex. Paul, do you want to add anything? I know you were interested in the question.
The only thing I'll add is I believe in my heart that Qatar has been a very, very bad actor with more influence than any country I have ever seen in my life. And I mean that. There isn't anywhere their reach hasn't gotten. These billions of dollars that have gone out to these universities, there's a direct correlation by what has happened on those at those universities. Jewish kids do not feel safe at those universities. Police are not safe. We're working with the campus police right now. Actually, your members of your police campus chiefs will be with me in Boston in the next 48 hours, where we're doing a major training of all the campuses regarding the protests. It's a lot more complex what's happening on those campuses. So we are doing a lot of work with the official organization that represents them, and Canada is front and center there and participating in those trainings.
Thank you, Paul. Conscious of our time, so I'm going to turn it over to Aubrey to close us out. But before I do, I want to thank all of you for tuning in with us tonight for this important discussion. Paul and Alex, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. Your expertise and your knowledge are demonstrable in hearing you speak, and I think we've all learned something tonight. So thank you so much.
It's our pleasure.
Thank you, Rich. And thank you, Paul and Alex, for a very informative, enlightening, sincere, and detailed Zoom and YouTube chat. Your unprecedented work and discussion of facts and truth is appreciated by all who have come to our country, to this country of Canada, for a better life for their children, grandchildren, and future generations. A most sincere thank you, a special thank you to all of tonight's attendees from across the country. And as we continue our fireside chats and YouTube events, we will continue to notify you of the upcoming events and our special guests. The fireside chat that had been scheduled with RCMP Assistant Commissioner Matt Peggs that was postponed earlier this month will be rescheduled, and you will be notified. Paul and Alex, I look forward to working with both of you as we continue walking down this road to looking at how we can further develop the relationship between our American side, our Canadian side policing, and our global policing. And a thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. And let's pray for light to overpower darkness during these difficult times. Please enjoy a wonderful, safe summer. And we look forward to seeing you at the next fireside chat. And good night. Thank you.
Good night.